Hello, hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Akos. I'm the CEO of Airtime, which is an autonomous discovery platform turning user calls into product insights in 2 clicks. You can run user research, sales, or customer service calls through it, and it will automatically identify dominant feedback patterns for you. Now, today, I'll be talking to David about saying no to high prio product requests, or should you say no, when you should say no. I think there's a lot of nuances here, and David as a perfect guest to look at these and examine these nuances. In terms of his background, his career spans over 20 years. He was an engineering manager at Google, for instance, and he was also the VP product and design at Hopin, the unicorn from 2020, 2021. Not to mention that he's also a startup founder himself, and he sold his startup to Hopin back in the days. Now, before we kick things off, if you have any questions for David, please put them in the comments. You can put them in the comments anytime. You don't have to wait until the Q&A section. I actually encourage and love when there's a lively discussion in the audience. So feel free to do that. And the second point is, if you'd like to get in touch with either we or David afterwards, I'll put our LinkedIn links in the comments as well. That's the easiest way to get in touch. Last thing before we jump in the deep water of saying no to high prior product requests is that being the CEO of Airtime, I really appreciate that you take the time and listen to these webinars and all the wisdom that my guests are sharing. So as a side gift, I'm going to leave also a secret promo code for Airtime for you. And in the comments section, it's going to give you 25% off for 3 months. Now, I think I talked long enough. We're 2 minutes into the session. So David, let's kick things off. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I'd love to hear a short introduction from you. So we'll learn who you are and what your background is.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Akos. And hello, everyone. I'm David Aubespin, originally from France, as you can hear from the accent or the name, but moved to New York about 20 years ago, when it was a really, really bad place for tech people at the time, because the only places you could work or find jobs at were the IT departments of big banks, right? And there were less than 10 startups in the city, probably. I started out in research at IBM Watson, but very quickly I realized that I preferred to build things rather than write papers. So after a couple of years, I joined one of the very few startups in New York City called eMeta. As a software engineer. eMeta was doing digital licensing and was used by all of the big names at the time, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, etc., because the only authentication was a password file on your web server. And eMeta offered concurrencies, groups, what have you, IP addresses, all of the things that are table stakes these days. But back then it was a big thing. So a lot of development in Java, and had a lot of fun. And eventually the company got acquired by Macrovision. Around 2005, as Akos was mentioning, I was lucky enough to join Google as the third solutions engineer in the US. And it was
Wow.
So I got to work on the AdWords API, which was brand new at the time. But I also got to work with some of Google's top customers, and which was amazing because it gave me a lot of exposure to the business side of things, which would prove to become very, very important for my transition to product later on. That role, was very useful, became big, hired a lot more, and then eventually became the manager for that team, which was my first foray into management. 2011-ish, Foursquare was a big thing. People started sharing their GPS location, if you remember. And to me, that was like amazing. I was like, wow, now people are actually okay sharing where they are in real time. And that's when I left Google and started Topi, which was professional networking around conferences. Initially, it was not around conferences, to be honest. It was more B2C, but we very quickly pivoted towards conferences. and it became one of the first networking app for conferences. We eventually built an all-in-one platform with registration, etc., etc. Fast forward now to 2020, Hopin is already a huge success. They just launched at the perfect time a virtual event platform right before COVID, but it's just that, right? It's a web stream pretty much with a chat on the right hand side. So Johnny approached us, and Topi became Hopin's first acquisition, and I joined as their VP of product, and the rest is history. We became pretty big company, built the entire suite of features that event planners expect for the events. And then finally, around 2022, I was already advising a few companies initially from friends or friends of friends, and I just loved it. I loved getting involved with founders without having to be in the trenches, day to day battling left and right. So I founded Delightful Products, through which I and a few others are offering product and engineering advisory services to B2B and to B2B SaaS companies. But we're also working with an AI company around education tech and another one around crypto payments. So we're expanding a bit as well.
Amazing. I had the honor of attending TechCrunch Disrupt last year, the Battlefield 200 with Airtime, and it was the first time that I experienced this networking aspect where I could connect with investors, fellow startup founders, or any attendants, and just organize meetings. And I found it extremely valuable as opposed to leaving it to random chance or manual research trying to find out who's going to attend and set up meetings with them or start a discussion. So I personally saw a lot of value from this topic.
It was exactly, actually, our tagline was serendipity by design. Instead of leaving, those amazing meetings up to chance, we were trying to make them happen a little bit more formally, based on a bunch of stuff, as you can imagine. And so I'm glad you found a lot of value in it, and it was an amazing time.
Yeah, and this is the last side note here. We're using StreamYard for the webinar today.
I heard about them. Yeah.
Is this some sort of a spin-off from Hopin, or are they did they grow out from Hopin, or were they?
So it was initially acquired by Hopin.
Yeah.
I forget exactly in which order. I think it was the second or third acquisition, and they're now they're separate entity again.
Separate entities. Yeah. Okay. So you're also acquainted with the platform that we're using right now, so to some extent. All right, but StreamYard and all the webinar streaming, that's not why we are here today. Why we are here today is to learn from you how to manage feature requests from powerful stakeholders when they ask to fast track what they are experiencing from. And what I'm really interested in, because you have this decades of overview and experience in product building from the engineering side as well as from product management and design, I was wondering if this is more of an exception that the powerful level, we can call it the CEO, it could be a VP of sales, somebody in the company asking for a feature to be built right away. Is this more of an exception, or does this happen regularly in your experience?
Yeah. Good question. Every time I hear decades, I feel very old. But you're right.
I know, that's not how I wanted to.
Absolutely. But it is. So let me tell you, I don't know of any startup where this doesn't happen at least once a month. To be honest, where at Hopin it happened weekly. Sometimes even multiple times weekly, probably. So I think as a product leader, as a product person, you should really see this as a feature and not a bug, especially if you work at a small to medium-sized company. And in a way, it's probably a good thing, because it also gives you a pulse on how relevant some of the things you're working on are for the company, right? So don't treat it this way, and this way you'll think about it more positively. In my experience, it seems to happen a little bit more in companies where the founder or the CEO are technical, because they know how to do it, and how long things should take, and they probably even remember when things would take an hour and now it's taking a week. So yeah, be aware of that if you're working at such a company. But I'd say in small companies especially, yeah, that's totally the norm, and you're going to have to deal with it.
Okay. Okay. This is about founders. I'm really intrigued by that, and this is a personal experience that I have. That as your company grows and as your product grows, there's a certain proximity that builds up between you and doing something. So there are things that I used to do myself about a year ago, and now, like, I even used to write user stories with my co-founder, and then he did the coding part, but I was like helping him out as a PM very often. I'm not doing that right now, and as this proximity builds up, are even technical founders, do they really have these sharp insights that can trigger the team? Do they give the right impulses, or are they sometimes being micromanagers when they do that, and they just can't accept the fact that this company has gotten bigger?
It's probably a little bit of both, to be honest, right? Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I don't think it's one or the other. Look, I was a founder and I was pretty technical myself. Fortunately, my co-founder, who was also the CTO, was one of my best friends and still is to this day. So that's testament that things worked out.
Yep.
But yeah, even I was, the first one to be frustrated and things, would take longer than I think they would. I would literally go sometimes, in the code and tell him, hey, look, I kind of did it already, etc., etc. And so these things happen. I think there's almost like a tipping point where the more you start talking to customers, the more at least for me, what happened is I was getting more joy and more energy talking to customers and kind of handling the marketing, sales, and product market fit side of things than how things get done. And when that happens, the company is going to be in a better place. If as a CEO you're still micromanaging and checking every Git commit, you should look inward and maybe change things a little bit.
All right. Okay. So let's come back to our main topic today, and I think there are a few examples in my mind. Some things that happened to me, for instance, like the CEO coming to you and saying, "Hey, I need this right now. Drop everything you have and let's just work on this." This is something that I also tried at least to do as a CEO of my own startup, and then have a discussion about this with my co-founder. Another typical example would be someone from sales, pitching like a feature to a client which hasn't been built. I think many of us has experienced this. I'm curious, what are the typical examples that you've come across that put you on the spot of, okay, oh my God, we need to handle now something high priority out of the blue?
Yeah. So that happens a lot, right? And so first of all, I would say that the most important thing that probably we're going to talk about today was to realize that it's not against you. Don't take it personally. I know it's much easier said than done sometimes, especially in the heat of the moment, but it's really crucial that you sit back and realize quickly that it's not about you or against you. Okay, stakeholders have plenty of reasons to try and push features faster, whether it's competitive pressure, quarterly goals, high profile customer requests, what have you. But exactly right, the ones you were mentioning. But in my experience, usually it kind of boils down to two categories. The first reason, and by far the most common, is the one you mentioned, is if we don't ship that feature, we're going to lose that customer, right? Or we're not going to sign that customer, or what have you. So whether it's a churn or a customer that is not going to sign as a result of not having that feature. And it's good to think about that angle, because actually sometimes the question could become, do we even want that customer? I know that sounds crazy, but especially when you're a startup, I definitely remember when I was running Topi and we only had, I don't know, 100 customers, not even like 20 customers or something like this. You don't want to lose any customer. But sometimes it is actually the right thing. Pushing for a feature for that customer may not be the right decision. So good to think about it from that angle. The second reason for which people try to push a feature usually is because of a strategic priority. Far less common, to be honest. But these can happen, right? So for example, the CEO is in the middle of a fundraising and the fundraise doesn't happen unless that feature is pushed to market. The CEO will know that. You probably don't know that, right? And you have no data, no user research that can tell you that you need to push that feature. So that would be a good example. When you were in the event, when I was in the event tech industry in 2020, when COVID happened, believe me, there was a very urgent need for virtual conferences, something that no one really cared about a few months before, right? So that's another big strategic priority, and then yes, you definitely need to push things around. These days, right, more recently, AI is probably a good example of that, and I'm sure that virtually every roadmap out there has been updated to reflect this new change in priorities. So yeah, to answer your question, you can see that why people has to prioritize their features can go from something fairly personal, right? It could be this person's quarterly sales goal, or making this customer happy, to something as broad as a change in the company strategy. But most definitely, it's not going to be against you. That's the one thing that you need to remember when you have to face such a situation.
Okay, I think this is a very important point, and I'd like to unpack this a little bit, because I think each of us in our roles, we're in our world and are expert of that, and we know, let's say the world of a PM, they know how they want to prioritize. What's the framework that the company adopted for prioritizing feature requests? So when there's like an override, it feels like a disrespect of the rule. It feels like a disrespect of your person. No, it's easy to at least feel that way. And you're saying this is exactly the wrong kind of feeling that we shouldn't get normally. Right? I understand your
100%,
point.
100%. But as I said, much easier said than done, right? If it's the CEO, sometimes you're like, okay, it's the CEO, but it could be your peer just in another department, right, who has a little bit more of a political clout, and you're gonna have to deal with that. And it does feel a little bit personal, but there are very few situations when it's personal, and maybe we'll touch on that later.
Okay. You mentioned that you also had a period of time when you, let's say, on average, got one such high prior request a week, which is a lot. And I'm curious what kind of impact it had on your team or on potentially other stakeholders around the product team when. And correct me if my assumption is wrong here. Like, I assume that you had some sort of a roadmap, and then getting like new tickets on there every week and reprioritize it adds a certain volatility and uncertainty in what we're building and where we're going. And feel free to disagree. And
no, you're absolutely right. So by the way, saying that you
yeah.
get many of those requests does not mean you say yes to all of them, right? So that's probably the most important point. Otherwise, you might as well not even have a roadmap. It depends on your role. If you're a product leader, I think one of the most important things that you have to do is always shield your teams from such requests as much as possible, right? As you probably, everybody would agree with me, I don't think I'm saying anything extraordinary by saying these are extremely disruptive and create a lot of short-term frustration, right? Even if maybe in the end the outcome is really positive, it's going to create a lot of frustration from the teams, and it could also undermine your ability to deliver later on, right? Because people will kind of see you as a pushover who just bends over and just says yeah to everything. So especially as a product leader, make sure not too many of those requests trickle down to your PM, to your product team.
Yeah. I'm curious because we're gonna talk about when you say yes or no, but I think we had a chat before this webinar a couple of months ago, and in that discussion there was something really interesting and counterintuitive that I didn't think of when I thought about this topic, was that you can actually preempt some of these situations. And I'd like to ask you to explain your strategy. What did you do to manage the influx of such ad hoc high priority requests in the first place?
Sure. So I to be very precise, I don't think you can fully preempt them, right? So I don't think this situation can be fully preempted. You can smooth them over a little bit, right? So the TLDR, unfortunately, guys, I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell you you do X and these requests will not happen again. Unfortunately, I don't think that's ever going to happen. And as I said, as a product and product leader, see this as a feature and not as a bug. So yeah, people from marketing, sales, legal, anywhere, they're always going to try to and push their features, and that can be stressful. But number one, think of it as a yet another prioritization exercise. A little bit real time, but it's still a prioritization exercise, which is what product people do anyways, right? It's their bread and butter. Number two, people are trying to push features that you're responsible for. Well, again, that means that you have influence on things that have an impact for the company, and that alone should make you feel good about yourself. So that being said, there are three things really that you can and you definitely should do before those situation happens, right? And so number one is over communicate. Always over communicate, and I'll expand a little bit on that. Number two, be very proactive, and number three, be transparent. Okay, so these are the three things. I'm going to expand a little bit on each of them, even though they seem to be pretty obvious on the surface. So on over communicate. Make sure that people in the company are always aware of the big strategic items that you have to ship, right? And I'm not saying the roadmap in details, etc., but at least those big things, those big items, because in a way, what you're doing is you are signaling that you're very intentional about what you're shipping, and you're also very busy doing it, right? That last point is important. There's signaling. Signaling matters, and when I say over communicate. I don't mean just send many product updates emails or something like this bi-weekly or weekly, because people are busy, right? People are busy. They may read it, they may not read it, and even if they read it, they probably forgot about it, right? When their most important thing pops up. So use any opportunity that you have to spread your product updates. Slack channels, company all hands. My personal favorite, it's always been the same. Find the connectors in each department and have informal one-on-ones with them, right? So you know those people. Every department has at least one person who's popular, friendly, connected to everyone there. Find out who that is and try to genuinely connect with that person, right? Have a one-on-one, chit chat. It doesn't really matter, but then you can pepper a little bit of your product updates. And even if you do that bi-weekly, monthly, I promise you that your product updates will reach everyone in that department through the grapevine. That really works well. Actually, at Hopin, it worked so well that I had created a semi-formal product ambassador role for people in other departments, not in product and engineering. And they became product ambassador, and they could do everything that a PM does. They could listen in on the daily stand-ups. They could join the product reviews. They could do whatever they wanted, right? And this was actually a huge success. I'm going to talk a little bit about proactive, but I'm going to pause just in case you want to say anything about.
No. I love what I'm hearing, and I don't want to stop this flow of valuable
Absolutely.
insights. So carry on, please.
Cool. So the second one was to be proactive, right? So this one is absolutely obvious, but unfortunately, I also know that everyone is busy with the next thing that they have to ship, and we never have time for it. Even though if you think about the Eisenhower metrics, right, it's definitely in the top right in the important, not urgent, and it's definitely something that you should schedule. Sorry, but yeah, we never have time. And I remember I read somewhere, I'm sure if you Google, maybe you'll find out, something that always stuck with me, which is you never want to meet your neighbor for the first time in the middle of the night because your house is on fire, right? And I think that's exactly the right mindset for how you should approach your relationship with the various stakeholders. Get to know them, get personal with them, because every conversation, especially the hard ones, will be a lot simpler. So be proactive. And lastly, another one that seems obvious on the surface is to be transparent. Obvious as well, but gets lost, in the day-to-day battles. Be transparent on on how you review feedback, on how you review insights, on you touched on prioritization framework. Be transparent about how things get prioritized. Actually, on that topic, on prioritization, before we go a little bit crazy around prioritization frameworks, which I know PMs love, two things. I don't suggest that you go around or that you use, precious one-on-one times to explain in details your prioritization framework, whatever it may be, by the way, right? It doesn't really matter. Don't go around trying to explain to everyone. I think if you have like a simple scale, 0 to 5, with a few criteria for each score, 0 being I have a hunch, I have an idea, but I don't really have any good data to back it up. And 5 being we launched a beta, we launched that feature in beta, and now we have incredible results to back it up, and we should move forward with it. And try to use that scale over and over in informal discussions with everyone outside of product and engineering. Obviously, product and engineering use whichever prioritization framework you want, but try to keep things simple. So people can actually discuss that same prioritization, not framework, I don't want to use the same word, but concept, with one another. There is actually a book from last year called Evidence Guided by Itamar Gilad, and it talks about the confidence meter, which is, it's much more advanced, but it's kind of the same concept, and it's probably a good starting point if you don't know where to start about how to create this scale. And sorry, number 2 on prioritization. We're talking about things that you can do preemptively here, right? So
Yes.
that's why I bring the topic of prioritization. To be clear, never use the prioritization framework after the fact, right? So when we talk about, okay, someone has pushed down that feature and now it sits on your lap, and what do you do with it? Do not use the prioritization framework to fight back someone who's trying to push a request. I promise you, before you know it, you'll be arguing with that person about whether RICE is a good framework or not, and don't do that, and don't ask me how I know about that. So yeah, I'll repeat it again. Evangelize the way you prioritize proactively, but don't use it as a shield against one of those fast line requests.
Yeah. I always I had some of these discussions, and I always felt it's just a joker or like a trump card, which is in the hands of a product leader, where they say, okay, we're not going to do this because of X. But going back to your point, I really love the ambassador. I'm going to pick up a few keywords that I heard in there to build almost like an ambassador program with other departments, where you have key colleagues who listen in on what the what the product team is working on, and they can be sort of your loudspeaker in their respective little communities and networks, spreading your way of thinking, the agenda, what the focus that you have for the next quarter. And I guess it just spirals down to a lot of times then people doing some check on their own, before they run with the feature request. They say, oh, this is so important, I really love this, when they see there are 3 other things that the product team is working on this month, which is equally important.
Exactly.
I may be just fine with that. And then there's one high prio request preempted.
Absolutely. So that's, seeds. You plant seeds, and hopefully you have to do a little bit less communication down the line. It really, really works well, because it pretty much everything that I've mentioned before, you signal the fact that you're actually working on very important items as well to everyone, right? You don't over rely on the product update that probably not a lot of people will read in excruciating details, or they will forget about it. You also come across as very open and transparent, because sometimes, let's be frank, right, product and engineering, people think a little bit as they live in their ivory tower, and they take customer feedback and insights and they spit out features, and that kind of breaks that image a little bit as well.
Yeah. In the meantime, I'm just also looking at the clock and opening the floor. I still have a few more questions, but I also want to open the floor to the audience. If you have any questions, if you have any situations that you happen to be in, or that you may end up being in, and you'd like to pick David's mind, this is the moment. If you want to reach out to him in private directly, you can do that anytime on LinkedIn too. So that's an option. So I'm just going to keep an eye on the comments for now. And one point that I wanted to bring up is a very important concept in user research, and I'm going to come to product management in a second, is exposure and exposure time. And what I mean by that is that to expose people to users who are non-researchers. It could be a designer, even developers, like our developers are sitting on user research calls as well, because it helps them to build empathy and helps them to be part of the process. So like any sort of arguments that we may have can be on the level of premises, and not just I have opinion A and you have opinion B, and we're both entitled to have opinions. Yes, everybody is entitled to opinions, but then if you want to resolve that, my experience is that you have to go a level deeper and just list, okay, what are my assumptions that lead to the conclusion that I have? And then typically you can more easily find common grounds there.
Nothing to add. Amen to that. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I am one question though. Yeah. Your CEO comes to you, and by me, it doesn't have to be you personally. It can be anyone in the audience, and they say, "I want this feature right now." And even if you have a legitimate argument, and it's not the prioritization matrix, but like another legitimate argument why it shouldn't be prioritized, it feels a very difficult discussion. Like that person that founded this company, built it, right? In many cases, how do you go in that discussion, and how do you deliver a no if you have to, if this is the right answer to a powerful stakeholder?
Yeah, I mean, it's most of the time it's going to be powerful stakeholders, right? It's usually not going to be an equal. So you're going to always deal with people who have more political clout than you. So first of all, as I said, don't take it personally, right? For those who read Thinking Fast and Slow, don't let your system one handle the automated reply. So, have some kind of email ready, say, hey, would love to learn more about et cetera, and schedule quickly a one-on-one with that person, whoever that may be, even if it's the CEO, to hear them out. Right. At that point, you are not sending a yes/no decision. Right. That's very important. You are not saying no yet. Maybe you will. Maybe you have a hunch that you will say no, but you're not doing that because again, there are situations where you would want to change the priorities a bit. Right. We were chatting with Akos a little bit about this as well. You may not know everything that your CEO knows, and I think a fundraising could be a very good example where, yes, prioritization goes out the window. So I highly recommend a live one-on-one. Don't have these conversations via email. They're just too much because there's going to be a lot of back and forth. I even actually suggest a video conference or live, obviously, because you want all the cues possible, right? And what you're going to be doing is you're really going to be listening actively and asking follow-up questions, right? You're really trying to get to the bottom of it, and that's why email or Slack just doesn't really work well for that initial conversation. Hopefully, it's not the first time you're meeting this neighbor in the middle of the night, right? As we discussed before, and if you have a rapport with that person and there's no animosity with you, that should be okay. So ask question, listen, ask question. Make sure you don't ask a loaded question, right? Because that sometimes happens a little bit. You ask a question trying to shut down the request a little bit too too fast. So make sure you ask genuine questions and don't bring your own judgment. It's totally fine to bring data to the other person if he or she is not aware of it. But again, it's not a yes/no discussion at that point. So genuine energy, show some enthusiasm, and that's that. You take a lot of notes, easier than ever now with AI, and have some kind of record of the conversation for later on, right? And share it with that person as soon as possible after the call. All about being transparent again. Now, the last thing in that initial conversation, you're not saying yes, no. That probably you want to do with the stakeholder is to t-shirt size the effort, right? Medium, small, large, for those of you who may not know the term, needed for that feature, and lightly touch on trade-offs already. You plant the seed for the fact that, hey, this is kind of a zero-sum game here. To do this faster, something else will have to give. And if you've been communicating a lot about the big items on your roadmap and how things get prioritized, that conversation is usually easy, but you want to make sure people realize that there's no free lunch, right? So don't say yes or no, but at least now that the stakeholder doesn't think in a vacuum anymore and has to take into account the other things that could drop off. Now, after that, very quickly, you go and you do your proper homework, right? This is the real work at that point. You kind of diffuse the first request, but now you need to go and investigate. So that's when you go and you speak to your marketing, your sales, your engineering manager. This is kind of the yes/no moment, right? For yourself, at least. And this is when you're also going to need good situational awareness, because so if the request is a one-time thing to please a customer, you're going to know very quickly, and it's going to be fairly easy to say no to it, right? Because it doesn't really fit the overall strategy. But more often than not, it's not as clear cut, right? It's a little bit more complicated. So what you're going to do is you're going to talk to a bunch of people, and you're going to get thumbs up, thumbs down, left and right. And that's when things become a little bit political. And I don't mean that in a negative way, right? But that's when it becomes not so clear cut. And when it's not so obvious, what you want to make sure is you want to associate the right stakeholders in the decision as much as possible. And to be even more precise, actually, you want to make sure that they understand that they are being associated with the decision. I don't mean to threaten them, right? It's not like, hey, buddy, if I go down, you go down with me kind of thing. But for example, that Google Doc or whatever it is that you keep as a record that I mentioned before, you want to make sure you add your notes constantly, right, as comments, etc., mentioning the people you talk to, etc. So you associate people in that decision, right? Very, very important in those not clear-cut cases. And now the investigation is over, right? You have your answer and you deliver the message. At that point, I think an email is the best. Because especially if it's a no, the other person will have a reaction to it, but you've done your homework. You explain your points very quickly. You give an overview of your investigation, and you send a link to the supporting doc, right, with everybody mentioned there. So, and you've been genuine and thorough, and all the data is available, and at this point it's in the document. If the stakeholder is not okay with it, well, unless it's the CEO, they kind of have to disagree and commit at that point, right? So that's kind of how I would go about it. I'm going to pause a little bit to let you comment if you have anything to say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good process. I really like what you suggested here, because the things that I hear is a respect on the one hand for the other people's requests. So even if I don't agree with it, or my first reaction would be, that we shouldn't be wasting our time on that. Taking a step back, letting go of your own opinion, asking questions and understanding, getting more context, why and where this request is coming from, what they want to achieve. And at the same time, also providing a context that your counterpart doesn't have. Like, okay, if I work on this now, this is how much it's going to cost in context switching. This is these are the tickets that we need to drop right now, so we're not deliver X, Y, Z. I think it also creates this, because it's I said on the other side, and as a non-technical person, a lot of a small feature. Why don't we just add a delete button here? It's just a button, right? You can design it in a second. Well, you don't necessarily think of the database changes and all the nuances that trickle down from that small little feature. So giving that additional context is also very helpful. And I think if someone's a good leader, they will even appreciate that, and that you help them make a better decision.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even if it's the CEO and you're doing, exactly what I've mentioned, and you genuinely say no to that, obviously that person can overrule you, but you actually have shown that you have integrity, intellectual integrity, and you're just a good product person. So never fear saying no if you know that you've genuinely done your homework and you're just not saying no because it's your initial system one reaction.
Yeah. I have a last question for you, David. And unless we get some questions from the audience, we're going to wrap up afterwards. There we go. I just had to say it. Peter, thanks a lot. We have our first question from Peter. What comes after the no? How do you feel the gap?
What comes after the no? How do you fill the gap?
So when yes, so yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah. No, Peter cannot speak, right?
No, he can't. He
Got
can't.
it. So how do you interpret that? What comes after the no? I'm not sure. What do you do after the no? So meaning there's going to be two situations, right? The person will have to disagree and commit, or the person is the CEO and overrules you, right? So that's I'm not sure which one. I'm going to try to address both. If it's in either case, if you've done the homework, you come out the winner. Because you show that you have intellectual integrity, as I said, and let's say the CEO comes and overrules you, so you now push this feature, and that feature is pushed prior to the one that you were working on. There's going to be two scenarios. There's going to be that it's successful or it's not, right? In which case, if it's not successful, in which meaning you're right, that's your opportunity to actually show that you're a team player. So what you do here, you take your document and you augment it. You figure out, why was I right? What data point that I had already was actually the most important. And next time, you have a one-on-one with that stakeholder, you can actually share the knowledge, right? You show that you're a team player. You're not gloating, obviously, but you show that your initial assessment was correct, and maybe you had even underestimated how important this data point was. And if you lose, meaning if that feature that was pushed by the CEO now is a huge success, then you do almost exactly the same. You augment your document, you add, the stuff that you could not possibly foresee. And when you have another one-on-one with that stakeholder, first of all, you're happy because that feature is successful, which probably is good for the company, and it's not about you, right? So you show that you're a team player, and you show that you have this growth mindset, meaning you had not foreseen that. Maybe you could not foresee that, but now you've actually integrated it in your thinking and in your toolbox, and that way, no matter what happens after that, no, you come out as a winner.
Amazing. So it's win-win-win.
Exactly.
Actually, 3 times. Is there any sugar coating in case you say no to a feature? It can feel sometimes you're losing your face. I'm a leader of a company and I ask for something, and this, even if there are legitimate arguments, that I get a no, and I feel like, oh, I'm losing the respect and face in this discussion. I was just thinking if you have some
as the stakeholder. So is the
yes,
so
yeah,
I'm
exactly.
the stakeholder.
I'm the VP of sales, and I got a no, and well, nobody likes to hear no, right? Even if there's legitimate and a solid train of thought behind that. Do you have some sugarcoating, or would you recommend sugarcoating at all?
Absolutely not. So absolutely not. By that I mean, so when you deliver the no, it's a no. It's not now, but maybe later. It's not no, but maybe let's chat about it a little bit more, etc. Because you're gonna shoot yourself in the foot. But what's very important is that you have that report that we've been discussing, quite a bit. If you've never chatted with that person, if that's a stakeholder that you've never really talked to, yeah, the situation is going to be hard. And what you probably want to do after you deliver the no via email, as I said, is you want to have another one-on-one that's going to be a lot more informal, more on a personal level, to really explain that this, you want to make sure that there's no animosity, etc., etc. You want to have that live conversation with that person as soon as possible if you had not created the report yet. There's a question, I see.
So thanks, David. I just put the next question on the screen, and I think this is also a very interesting question because I mostly picked on product managers in our discussion so far. And is this any different for a designer or a product designer?
So it really depends it really depends on the company. Some at Hopin, designers were very much the equal of PMs, so not much would change, even though, to be frank, the PM tends to be the first contact point, for any outside request, right? Because they kind of manage the roadmap. But when I was saying, the PM goes and investigates, obviously the designers are involved, right? And they're very much important. And depending on the feature, if the feature is a backend, platform API thing, maybe they're not going to be as involved. But if there's any kind of front end of workflow involved, the designer is as big as a stakeholder as the engineering manager. So whether things change or not, I would say it depends a little bit on the company, and which company you work for, depending on where designs sit, right? So designs at Hopin, there was very elevated. There was pretty much that you had product management and design, and you had the same leadership, the same level. If in your company design sits under product management, you may not have a stronger voice at the table, and yeah, things could be a little bit different, unfortunately.
A bit tougher.
Yeah.
David, thanks so much, and thanks for the questions also from the audience members. I love that we could deep dive into these two separate topics in the end. With that, I also would like to wrap up. If you have any remaining questions, something that popped up in the last minute, feel free to reach out to either of us on LinkedIn. You find our links in the chat history back in the top. David, it was my pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me. There's just so much wisdom in what you shared. I'd love to write I have now at least 5 articles in mind that I could expand on what you just shared. A lot of wisdom, a lot related to not frameworks and not showing your prioritization scheme, but building relationships with your colleagues and giving them a sneak peek into how you work, so they have empathy for that work. And I think that's one of the most important messages that I heard from you today. So David, to wrap things up, 3 points. If you have to say 3 things that we should remember from all the discussion today, what would those be?
I think I would reemphasize, over communicate proactively.
Okay.
And by over communicate, I really mean, whether it's email or relationship. Number 2, be transparent. And number 3, most important, it's not about you.
Okay, that's the best final word. It's not about you. Thanks to you, David. Thanks for the audience for being there, for asking questions and being active. And I wish all of you a nice rest of the day, evening, depending on where you've tuned in from. All the best to everyone. Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Ciao, ciao.